Major General Alexander Kendrick paused in the doorway of his suite at the Vienna Grand Hotel, allowing his senses to absorb every detail before he stepped inside. The moment he closed the heavy oak door, a hush fell over the room, a sanctuary of soft light and muted tones carved from gleaming marble and polished walnut. Above him, a crystal chandelier dripped prisms of light across pale silk drapes that framed a sweeping view of the Ringstrasse below, where carriage rides clattered on cobblestones and distant church bells tolled the hour. To his left, an antique writing desk bore the subtle patina of age. Brass inkwells stood sentinel beside gilt-edged stationery, a reminder of letters he had once written home but never sent. He approached the full-length, gilt-edged mirror with measured steps, each footfall muffled by the thick Persian carpet dyed in shades of burgundy and midnight blue. His reflection stared back unwaveringly, a lean figure in a perfectly tailored charcoal-gray tunic, the collar embossed with the silver laurel leaves of his rank and medals gleaming like frozen droplets on his chest. The ribbons, emerald for distinguished service, sapphire for valor, and crimson for leadership, lay pinned in precise alignment, each representing battles waged not on sunlit fields, but beneath the phosphorescent glow of server room monitors. He reached up to smooth the crease of his lapel, the metal of each button cool under his fingertips, and allowed himself a brief moment of pride, tempered by the familiar ache of solitude. On the ornate side table, a porcelain tray held remnants of his afternoon ritual. A single white rose, dew fresh, accompanied by a handwritten note from the hotel concierge confirming tonight's arrangements. Table 17, corner of the ballroom, 6 guests per table. He had expected nothing else. Subconsciously, he touched the small silver compass hanging from his neck, its needle forever pointing toward home, and recalled his mother's soft voice at his 18th birthday. No matter where you are in the world, let this guide you back. He closed his eyes, inhaling the faint scent of bergamot that lingered in the suite, and felt the weight of their unspoken years settle around him like a cloak. Behind him, a bronze statue of Archangel Michael, sheathed in armor, sword drawn, stood atop a mahogany pedestal. It was a gift from an old NATO ally, meant to symbolize protection and resolve. Alexander traced the statue's finely carved wings with his eyes, drawing strength from its unyielding stance. He remembered the night he had accepted the Phantom Grid command, standing under storm clouds and watching satellites pass overhead, feeling both insignificant and invincible in that same moment. Yet no accolade, no medal, had ever mended the distance between him and the life he left behind. A soft knock at the door jarred him from his reverie. Colonel Petra Holm entered, her crisp uniform immaculate, eyes bright with genuine warmth. "Major General Kendrick," she said, voice hushed to respect the privacy of his moment. "Dinner will be served in 30 minutes. The staff is ready to escort you." Alexander inclined his head, offering a small but sincere smile. "Thank you, Petra. I'll be down shortly." She departed as quietly as she had come, leaving the room bathed once more in stillness. He turned back to the mirror, standing tall, every muscle poised yet unstrained. The man who looked back embodied decades of discipline and duty. But Alexander Kendrick reminded himself of the promise he carried in his heart. Tonight he would not hide behind steel and secrecy. Tonight he would face his family as himself, the eldest son who had fled Surrey's green fields for the cold glow of code, the brother who had chosen a path they could not follow, yet whose compass had never wavered from true north. With that vow resonating through his chest, he stepped away from the mirror, seemed power and purpose in every stride, and crossed the suite toward the door, ready to re-enter the world he had forsaken. The ivory facade of the Vienna Grand Hotel rose like a marble citadel against the ink-black sky, its ornate cornices and carved pilasters bathed in the golden glow of wrought-iron lanterns. As Alexander descended the broad steps, the scent of night-blooming jasmine and fresh cedar mingled with the distant rumble of horse-drawn carriages on cobblestones. Through the revolving glass doors, he entered a vast atrium where polished onyx floors reflected the flicker of artfully placed candelabras, and walls clad in crimson damask were punctuated by gilded mirrors that multiplied the soft light. A double staircase swept upward in symmetrical curves, its scarlet runner edged with giltwood balustrades, leading to a mezzanine balcony draped in festooned greenery and twinkling fairy lights. Guests drifted through this sumptuous foyer like characters in a grand tableau. An ambassador in a midnight blue frock coat consulted a slender ledger. Two elderly duchesses in velvet robes compared lace fans. A pair of socialites laughed softly. Beneath ostrich feather wraps, their pearls catching the light, a young violinist in tailcoat coaxed a gentle melody from his instrument at a marble fountain whose water spilled in whispered cascades. Alexander noted the hush that rippled through the crowd as he passed, an undercurrent of courtesy edged with surprise. Yet no one spoke aloud. Their eyes merely flicked to his uniform's silver braid and the steady gleam of his medals. Beyond the atrium, double doors carved with bas-relief scenes of Johann Strauss dancing opened onto the grand ballroom. Inside, over 300 guests glowed beneath a vast canopy of cut crystal chandeliers, each teardrop prism scattering rubies, sapphires, and emeralds across starched linen and gleaming brass candelabra. Tables dressed in ivory damask hosted arrangements of deep red roses and late-season lilies, their scent woven through the clink of Bohemian glass and the soft susurrus of silk gowns brushing against parquet floors. In one corner, a baroque harpsichordist accompanied a string quartet, their music rising and falling like whispered confidences. An attendant in a tailored black tailcoat guided Alexander with discreet elegance toward table 17, tucked discreetly behind a Corinthian column carved to resemble a cascading vine. As he walked, he caught glimpses of his family at the head table. His father, Lord Gerard Kendrick, standing tall in a bespoke dark gray suit, exchanging pleasantries with a visiting tech magnate. His mother, Lady Cassandra, in an emerald green silk gown, her sapphire brooch sparkling at her throat. And Frederick, his younger brother, animatedly recounting a jest that sent ripples of laughter across the table. At table 17, 6 chairs of carved mahogany awaited him, each seat set with porcelain charger plates edged in gold filigree, crystal water goblets engraved with the Kendrick crest, and silver flatware polished to a mirror shine. The linen napkin folded in a fan at each place bore his own monogram, a subtle reminder that here he was, not only a guest, but part of a lineage that had kept this world turning. He settled into the deep velvet cushion, smooths the cuff of his tunic to reveal the compass engraving on his West Point ring, and exhaled softly as the attendant poured spring water from a cut glass carafe. From this vantage, half hidden yet acutely aware, Alexander surveyed the room's opulence, the pastel frescoes adorning the vaulted ceiling, the warm glow of candelabra reflecting off polished marble columns, the scent of jasmine mingled with rich notes of sandalwood from the hotel's signature diffuser. He allowed himself a brief moment of stillness, listening to the muted hum of polite conversation, the soft laughter and the gentle clinking of glasses, and reminded himself that beneath these ornamental trappings lay the same promise he had clutched in his heart, to honor his mother's wish by showing up, fully and unapologetically, at the most important family gathering he had long avoided. As the quartet's lilting waltz gave way to a gentle adagietto, Alexander Kendrick closed his eyes for a moment and let the music carry him back to the manicured lawns of the Kendrick estate in Surrey, where every summer morning had dawned with dew, glinting like diamonds on emerald grass. He could almost feel the cool touch of that grass beneath bare feet as he and Frederick, still in their nightshirts, tumbled through the rose arches woven overhead by Lady Cassandra herself, the air thick with the perfume of climbing pinks and damask roses. He remembered the red brick facade of the manor reflected in the still waters of the koi pond, where he had learned to polish his father's ceremonial saber under the crisp supervision of Colonel Harrington, the retired cavalry officer who tutored him, in discipline and honor. The walls of the oak-paneled library had held his whispered confessions, tales of schoolyard triumphs, nightmares about failing his exams, the fierce pride that had swelled in his chest when Lord Gerard Kendrick finally laid a heavy hand on his shoulder and acknowledged in rarely spoken words that he saw potential in the boy's determined gaze. Frederick's warm laughter had often echoed in that very room as he perched on the grand piano bench, fingers dancing over ivory keys, coaxing Chopin nocturnes, while Alexander recited Burns and Byron by candlelight. The memory faded as the waiter in crisp black and white approached Alexander's table with a silver salver bearing artfully arranged amuse-bouches, a delicate smear of smoked trout mousse on a blini, garnished with a single chive sprig, a slender, phyllo cup cradling goat cheese whipped with thyme, and a miniature Parmesan crisp topped with heirloom tomato jelly. He tasted each one in turn. The smoky salt of the trout against the pillowy blini, the tang of goat cheese laced with earthy herbs, the sweet shimmer of tomato jelly balancing the bite of aged cheese, and allowed himself a moment of pleasure before the hush of polite conversation tugged him back to the present. Around him, the guests at table 17 leaned forward, their fascination masked by careful smiles. A cousin in a jade-green evening dress traced the rim of her wine glass with lacquered fingertips and murmured about rising interest rates in Eastern Europe. A family friend with glistening cufflinks exchanged nods with a finance executive beside her. Two bankers tapped quietly on their sleek tablets, comparing portfolio projections in muted tones. Above their heads, the frescoed ceiling depicted mythic figures dancing across clouds, while crystal chandeliers swayed imperceptibly, capturing and fracturing light into 1,000 rainbows that sparkled on polished mahogany and embroidered damask. The scent of jasmine from the balcony mingled with the deep, honeyed aroma of roasted pheasant and truffle-infused jus drifting from the next course. From his seat beneath the carved relief of Vienna's old city walls, Alexander watched Frederick move to stand at the head table, his black-tie jacket flawless, his crisp white shirt accentuating strong shoulders, and deliver a light-hearted toast that drew warm laughter from their parents, Lord Gerard's proud smile as broad as the summer sky, Lady Cassandra's eyes glistening with unshed tears. The moment glittered with familial pride, yet as Frederick held the crystal goblet aloft, Alexander felt the familiar tug of outsider, the prodigal son seated out of sight at table 17, his invitation confined to a corner where polite indifference reigned. He pressed a gloved hand to the small compass at his chest, recalling his mother's words that morning, and resolved that this evening of whispers and sideways glances would be but the prelude to his return, to show them all that the boy who once polished a saber and recited poetry beneath tasseled lantern light was now Major General Alexander Kendrick, guardian of secrets that no ballroom's grandeur could overshadow. The soft flicker of candle flames danced across the mirrored panels of the ballroom as Alexander Kendrick lifted his crystal glass of mineral water to his lips, the cool clarity of the liquid a stark contrast to the heady warmth of rich burgundy, coursing through the rest of the hall. From his vantage at table 17, tucked discreetly behind a Corinthian column carved to resemble trailing ivy, he observed the intricate choreography of the wedding feast, gleaming silver platters bearing slow-roasted quail adorned with ribbons of charred leek, delicate soufflés of wild mushroom and tarragon that rose like ivory towers in spun sugar cages, and carts bearing aged Comté and Saint-Nectaire cheeses. Each wheel stands polished as though by candlelight itself. The orchestra had shifted to a lilting nocturne, its mournful strings weaving through the low murmur of guest conversation and the polite hum of forks against porcelain. He noted the subtle hierarchy in every placement. At the head table sat Lord Gerard Kendrick in a bespoke charcoal tailcoat, his countenance grave yet regal as he presided over the proceedings. Beside him, Lady Cassandra in a gown of midnight blue, silk, her sapphire pendant catching the glow of the chandeliers, and Frederick, ever the consummate host, moving with easy grace to ensure each toast was answered with laughter and applause. Meanwhile, Alexander's own escort, a trio of distant cousins in tawny velvet gowns and a silver-haired baron whose tartan shawl hinted at ancestral ties, regarded him with polite curiosity, their gloved hands poised above their plates as if uncertain how to include the uniformed general in their discussions of railway bonds and continental property markets. The air was rich with the aroma of truffle oil and rosemary-infused jus, punctuated by the floral sweetness of late-blooming jasmines tucked into every centerpiece. Lustrous marble columns soared to frescoed ceilings painted in pastel azure, where cherubs floated among gilded garlands, their painted smiles echoing the fragile cheer animating the guests below. Overhead, a string of crystal droplets trembled in time with the music, scattering pinpricks of light across polished mahogany surfaces and the silver filigree of invitation cards. The discreet staff moved like shadows. A footman in white gloves refilling water carafes, a sommelier in tailcoat whispering grape varieties to a hesitant guest, a server balancing trays of lemon-thyme sorbet that gleamed like frozen dew. Amidst this tapestry of opulence, Alexander felt the familiar thrum of isolation, an echo of the barracks where he had spent countless nights poring over lines of code by the pale glow of monitors, the hush broken only by the click of keyboards and the hum of cooling fans. Here, the silence between cordial exchanges felt heavier, each polite nod a reminder that this was not his realm. He traced the subtle curve of the monogram embossed on his linen napkin, recalling his mother's soft admonition that family gatherings were sacred ground. He inhaled slowly, tasting the faint tang of metallic anticipation on his tongue, and allowed his gaze to settle on the vaulted arch above the head table, where a painted motif of two eagles locked in flight presided over the celebration. In that moment, Alexander's resolve crystallized. In 1 week's time, at HeliosTech's glass-walled boardroom overlooking the Danube, he would claim his rightful place not merely as the eldest son, but as Major General Kendrick, the architect of security frameworks no gala could replicate. He would reveal to his father and brother the depth of his command, the authority vested in him by nations who trusted him to shield their most precious secrets. As the string quartet concluded its nocturne and the ballroom erupted into scattered applause, Alexander lowered his glass, steeled his posture, and offered a courteous nod to the head table, an unspoken promise that this evening's silent vigil would be but the prologue to his return. As the final strains of the string quartet's nocturne faded into the hushed hush of post-coursing conversation, Alexander Kendrick allowed himself a moment to observe the nuanced interplay of light, sound, and texture that defined the evening. The second course had arrived, a delicate consommé of wild forest mushrooms, its amber broth shimmering beneath a single curl of black truffle, placed before him by a waiter whose crisp white gloves contrasted sharply with the ebony tray he bore. He inhaled the earthy aroma, noting how the steam wove through the golden candlelight and mingled with the distant scent of rosewater drifting from the pastry carts. Around him, his cousins leaned forward to sip their soup, their jeweled earrings catching stray glints of lamplight as they exchanged murmured remarks about hedge fund performance in the Italian villa market. Beyond the polished mahogany and ivory damask, Alexander's gaze darted to the marble columns that framed the head table, carved to depict Baroque scenes of imperial Vienna, crowds of dancers in powdered wigs, the swirling skirts of courtly revelers, their painted gazes forever fixed in celebration. He remembered another kind of revelry, the bonfire nights in Surrey when Lord Kendrick would lift a young Alexander onto his broad shoulders and declare him future champion of the homeland, the wind rustling through ancient oaks as embers spiraled into the star-spattered sky. The memory flickered like a candle in the periphery of his mind, bringing a faraway ache that no metal or rank could soothe. As the ballroom lights dimmed briefly to cue a surprise performance, a soprano singing an aria from Mozart's Don Giovanni, the guests fell silent, their faces upturned in admiration. Isabella, Frederick's bride, her hair artfully arranged in an intricate chignon interwoven with tiny pearls, closed her eyes and inhaled the music with the grace of a seasoned patron of the arts. Frederick himself watched her with a tender pride, his hand resting lightly on hers as though sharing a private vow in the public glare. Alexander saw then how the tapestry of expectations and affections wove tightly around his brother. The glory of HeliosTech's IPO launching 3 months ago, Frederick's meteoric rise to Chief Innovation Officer at only 29, the glossy magazine covers that had immortalized him as Tech's young visionary. At that moment, a chill touched Alexander's spine, not from the evening air but from the stark contrast between their worlds. His own triumphs had been shadowed by secrecy, the classified directives he had authored to reroute hostile malware away from power grids, the clandestine summits at NATO headquarters where he negotiated peace behind closed doors, the encrypted cables that bore his name but would never bear his image. Here, under the chandelier's cool glow, his accolades were invisible, his sacrifices unsung. He pressed his fingertips to the compass at his chest, recalling the weight of his mother's faith that he would always find his way back. As the aria concluded and applause cascaded through the hall like a gentle wave, Alexander rose, catching the eye of a nearby footman who handed him a fresh napkin and signaled to clear the mushroom consommé from his table. He straightened the ribbon of his military sash, deep navy edged in silver braid, and allowed himself a flicker of resolve. In 7 days, at HeliosTech headquarters overlooking the gently flowing Danube, he would step into a world that mattered as much as this one, not as the silent sentinel in the shadows, but as Major General Alexander Kendrick, wielding authority, forged in years of disciplined service. Tonight, though, he would remain the eldest son, seated at table 17, gathering strength in the hush between courses, readying himself for the moment when duty and family would finally converge. A hush fell over the ballroom as the staff cleared the scallop towers and approached with gleaming silver chafing dishes for the 4th course. Alexander watched with keen interest as the valve on each dish was lifted, releasing a gentle plume of steam scented with lavender and thyme. Beneath the dome lay a succulent roulade of pheasant breast, its skin bronzed and crisp, swaddled around a buttery chestnut and port wine farce, resting in a shallow pool of reduced game just flecked with minced morel mushrooms. The attendant removed the lid with ceremonious precision, and the aroma, earthy, sweet, and herbaceous, spiraled upward like a benediction. As the roulade was plated, Alexander noted the artistry of presentation. A whisper-thin carrot ribbon spiraled beside tender pea shoots, an obsidian-black tapenade dotting the plate in geometric pattern, and a single burrs of violet petal for a final flourish. The plate itself gleamed pristine against the ivory damask of the tablecloth, where cut crystal goblets for Viognier and Brunello stood ready, their facets refracting the candlelight into dancing prisms at each place setting. Seated at table 17, Alexander lifted his fork and tasted the roulade, the pheasant's smoky richness yielding to the sweet warmth of chestnut and the tang of port, all anchored by the forest floor musk of morels. He closed his eyes, letting the flavors tether him to memory as firmly as the compass at his chest. Around him, the conversation shifted from stock indices to philanthropic ventures, how to marshal endowments for arts education in rural Hungary, and the latest trends in sustainable winemaking in Tuscany. Out of the corner of his eye, Alexander caught his father's profile at the head table. Lord Gerard Kendrick's jaw set in contemplative lines as he conversed with a visiting member of the Austrian Council on Cybersecurity, whose wristwatch gleamed, silver against his charcoal suit. Beside them, Lady Cassandra sipped from her water goblet, her gaze drifting toward the marble relief at the rear of the room. A sculpted tableau of Pegasus alighting at dawn, wings unfurled as though poised to lift into the sky. It was a symbol Lady Kendrick had chosen for this occasion. Freedom, aspiration, the triumph of spirit. Frederick rose then, glass in hand, clearing his throat for the customary speech. The murmur of the ballroom hushed as if on cue, and Alexander felt the familiar rush of expectancy. His brother's voice, warm, confident, resonant, echoed off the vaulted ceilings. "Friends and family, tonight we celebrate love, legacy, and new beginnings. Isabella, you are the light that guides me. Mother, father, your unwavering support has shaped us into who we are. And Alexander, though your career has taken you far from home, your achievements shine brighter than the stars that grace this ceiling." A soft gasp rippled through the guests. Alexander's pulse quickened at the rare ring of genuine admiration in Frederick's tone. As glasses rose and toasts were given, Alexander accepted the praise with a subtle inclination of his head, the candlelight glinting on his insignia like a beacon. In that charged moment, amidst the fragrance of lavender-thyme steam and the solemn nods of high society peers, he felt the first true tremor of connection since stepping into the hall. The ballroom's marble pillars, the frescoed sky above, even the bronze Archangel Michael statue in his suite seemed to pivot toward him, acknowledging the presence of a man who, at last, was being seen. When the echoes of Frederick's toast subsided, the orchestra shifted to a lively allegro, and waiters wove among the tables bearing golden tureens of velvety potato leek velouté infused with white truffle essence. Alexander set his crystal goblet aside and watched as the soup was ladled into shallow bowls, each garnished with a lustrous black truffle wafer and a sprig of chervil. The steam, fragrant with earthy musk and sweet leek, curled upward to mingle with the soft glow of candelabra flames. As he savored the first spoonful, the velouté's silken texture and delicate truffle perfume grounded him in the opulent present, even as his thoughts drifted once more to the disciplined solitude of his wartime postings. He recalled the subterranean command bunker beneath the North Sea, where he had overseen Operation Silent Fortress, a labyrinth of steel corridors and humming servers lit by the cold pulse of LEDs and staffed by analysts whose faces glowed in the monitor light. There, amid the constant cascade of log entries and intrusion alerts, he had found a different kind of family. Men and women united by purpose, bound not by blood, but by mission. In those underground halls, loyalty was earned at the speed of code, and respect was measured in lines of successfully thwarted malware rather than polite nods at a banquet table. Within the ballroom, the guests at table 17 murmured about political shifts in Eastern Europe and boutique hotel investments in Montenegro, their voices delicate against the swell of strings and woodwinds. A cousin in a sapphire sheath dress brushed a stray lock of hair behind her earlobe and leaned closer. "Major General," she said, voice low and respectful, "do tell, what brings you back to Vienna after so many years abroad?" Alexander offered a reserved smile, the candlelight flickering across the silver laurel leaves on his collar. "Family," he replied, his tone steady yet warm. "A promise I made." He paused, recalling his mother's voice in Surrey, and the reminder that some vows are kept only in person. Above them, the frescoed ceiling depicted Apollo's chariot racing across a dawn-lit sky, the golden horse's hooves, leaving trails of light. The chandeliers trembled in time with the music, casting ripples of light across the polished marble floor, where guests in evening finery drifted in waltz patterns around the periphery. At the head table, Lord Gerard Kendrick watched Alexander's exchange with a subtle shift of his hand, a gesture of consideration rather than dismissal, while Lady Cassandra's gaze softened, her lips curving in a tender half-smile. As Alexander finished his velouté and placed the bowl aside, the orchestra paused and a hush descended once more. A cellist stepped forward to perform a solo, deep, resonant notes that vibrated through the floorboards into every guest's chest. In that moment, Alexander felt the tension of the evening loosen, replaced by a shared recognition of beauty and artistry that transcended titles and expectations. He closed his eyes, letting the cello's voice wash over him, and allowed himself to believe that, here and now, he was not the outsider in uniform, but a son returned. Welcome at last to the circle of light beneath the crystal canopy. The fourth course arrived amid a flourish of silver and soft murmurs, a lacquered wooden tray bearing a terrine of venison marinated in juniper and cognac, its mahogany-hued interior studded with pistachio kernels and dried cranberries. The terrine was sliced tableside by a maître d'aigle and tailcoat, each knife movement precise and deliberate, the blade glinting under the chandelier's crystalline prisms. On Alexander's plate, the roulade was accompanied by a quenelle of celeriac puree flecked with chive confetti, a tangle of charred Brussels sprouts drizzled with aged balsamic reduction, and a rosette of pickled cranberry petals that showed off the chef's exacting eye for balance. The aroma, smoky venison, sweet fruit, and earthy celeriac, wove through the perfume of night-blooming jasmine drifting in from the balcony. Seated at table 17, Alexander noted the subtle shift in the room's tempo. The earlier formality gave way to a more relaxed fervor as guests savored each sumptuous bite. A cluster of Viennese bankers in Italian-cut suits discussed the potential impacts of shifting EU regulations, their voices low but animated. Across the room, a quartet of diplomats examined stained glass windows inset between marble pilasters, while Lady Cassandra rose gracefully from the head table to circulate, her emerald gown's train whispering against the parquet floor. Frederick caught his brother's eye and offered a nod of encouragement, the first unguarded connection they had shared all evening. Alexander lifted his fork and tasted the venison, the meat's rich game flavor melding with the warm juniper and portals of sweet fruit, the pistachios adding a restrained crunch. In that moment, he felt a kinship with the dish's complexity, layers of history, tradition, and unexpected harmony. His thoughts drifted to the sprawling forests of Scandinavia, where he had led joint exercises with allied cyber units, forging bonds with foreign officers over midnight strategy sessions while wolves howled beyond the tree line. In those secluded camps, camaraderie had been as vital as firelight, and respect was earned through shared hardship rather than pedigreed names. Here, amid the grand tapestry of velvet and gilt, he realized that earning his family's respect would require the same resolute patience. As plates were cleared and the room's lamplight softened, the orchestra resumed with a lively polka, its sprightly pace coaxing clusters of guests to the dance floor around the stage. Isabella led Frederick in a graceful opening dip that elicited warm applause, petals of white rose confetti drifting like snowflakes in their wake. Alexander rose to his feet beside his cousins, the hush returning as he prepared to join the dance, but then caught sight of Lady Cassandra approaching. Her eyes, softly glimmering, held an invitation without words. Gently, she placed a hand on his arm and guided him to the edge of the floor. "Would you dance, my son?" she asked, her voice a whisper that carried more warmth than the room's hearths. For a heartbeat, Alexander hesitated, the weight of his uniform's silver braid reminding him of the boundaries he'd long accepted. Then, with deliberate calm, he offered his hand, allowing his mother to lead him beneath the chandelier's prismatic glow. As they moved in unison to the lilting rhythm, his stern posture softened by the intimacy of the moment, he felt the compass at his chest pulse in quiet affirmation. The music swelled around them, a bridge between past and present, and Alexander Kendrick, Major General and eldest son, stepped fully into the circle of light, no longer an outsider at table 17, but a kinsman once again embraced by the very heart of his heritage. As the final polka strains faded into gentle chatter, the maitre d' signaled for the next delicacy, a palate-cleansing interlude of sorbet served in crystal coupes. Alexander watched the attendant pour a vibrant dollop of blood-orange sorbet, its surface glistening like stained glass, over a sprig of fresh mint. The sorbet's tangy sweetness cut through the earlier richness, and he savored the bright citrus burst that danced across his tongue. Around him, the ballroom's atmosphere had softened into convivial warmth. Guests embraced laughter as easily as they had reserved silence before, and the head table's earlier formality had given way to genuine smiles and animated conversations. From his seat at table 17, Alexander noted Frederick leaning in to share a whispered anecdote with their father, whose stern countenance had all but melted into proud amusement. Lady Cassandra, resplendent in her emerald gown, engaged a visiting ambassador in animated discussion of her philanthropic endeavors, her sapphire brooch catching every flicker of chandelier light. Even the distant cousins who had received Alexander with polite reserve now offered him easy nods as they reached for their sorbet, their earlier curiosity transformed into genuine interest. As he lifted the coupe, Alexander allowed his gaze to wander to the grand piano at the far end of the room, where Isabella now presided over a spirited rendition of a Viennese folk tune, guests tapping their feet and some reclaiming open floor space for impromptu dancing. The ornate fresco above depicted Apollo's dawn chariot, and in the warm glow it felt as though the very essence of renewal and new beginnings had been painted into the sky. He reflected on the winding path that had brought him here, from polished parade grounds and clandestine command centers to this marble hall filled with love, history, and the echo of family ties. With the sorbet's crisp sweetness still lingering, Alexander drew a quiet breath and raised his glass in a silent toast to the room. To the memory of the koi pond's still waters in Surrey, to nights spent decrypting threats beneath harsh fluorescent lights, to the steadfast promise he had carried in his heart. In that moment, he felt the full weight of reconciliation and recognition settle comfortably on his shoulders. No longer an unattached sentinel or a misplaced outsider, but a son, a brother, and a major general fully at home among the glittering constellations of crystal and candlelight. The banquet hall's atmosphere shifted as the maître d' signaled the arrival of the next masterpiece, a French rack of lamb presented on a silver salver so lustrous it mirrored the frescoed ceiling's pastel angels. Each rib was meticulously trimmed of sinew, its rosy interior glistening beneath a crust of Dijon mustard, crushed rosemary, and garlic confit whose aroma threaded through the jasmine-scented air. The server, gloved in pristine white, carved the rack tableside with disciplined precision, his blade humming as it slid between each bone. Then arranged thick, perfect medallions atop pillows of truffle-infused parsnip puree, swirled into peaks, the pale gold hue contrasting sharply with the lamb's sanguine tones. Alongside lay haricots verts tossed in garlic butter and sprinkled with toasted almond slivers, their bright green sheen and nutty crunch a vivid counterpoint to the meat's deep savor. At table 17, Alexander Kendrick raised his eyes from the succulents before him to observe the subtleties of the room's reawakening energy. The conversation, once mostly financial forecasts and glancing pleasantries, bloomed into warm recollections of shared childhood escapades. Lady Cassandra, her emerald brocade gown catching candlelight in every fold, leaned toward a pair of visiting consuls to recount how young Alexander had distracted a visiting dignitary with an impromptu demonstration of sword drills in the Manors. Great Hall. Frederick, his tailored tuxedo sleeves rolled back just enough to reveal a crisp cuff, chuckled beside his bride as he sipped a flute of sparkling rosé, the pale blush mirroring his bright enthusiasm. Alexander lifted his fork, the weight of the polished silver tempered by his steady hand, and tasted the lamb. The first bite delivered a luxurious interplay of textures, a crisp, rosemary herb crust yielding to a tender, rosy center, the gentle warmth of garlic suffusing each morsel, all anchored by an earthy buzz of truffle and the sweet nuttiness of almonds. He noted how the Dijon's tang danced at the back of his palate, coaxing out hidden notes in the wine that lingered like a promise. As he savored another forkful, his gaze drifted upward to the frescoed ceiling, a celestial panorama of mythic deities steering chariots through dawn skies, their painted expressions serene beneath gilded architraves. The chandelier's prisms trembled in unison with the string ensemble's allegro, scattering refracted light across marble columns and the diamond-cut water goblets, where swirling motes of crystal caught like miniature constellations. Across the room, the lineage of Kendrick portraits, stoic ancestors in powdered wigs, medals adorning their breastplates, seemed to lean forward in muted approval, as if witnessing a reunion of past and present. The bronze Archangel Michael statue that stood guard in Alexander's suite flickered to mind, its sword raised in silent benediction. He realized then that this ritual of lamb and conversation was more than a meal. It was a rite of passage, a bridge spanning the gulf between the boy who once tightened his father's saber belt and the Major General who now commanded armies in cyberspace. Finishing his course, Alexander laid down his knife and fork upon the linen napkin monogrammed with his initials, allowing the simmering warmth of family connection to replace the evening's earlier chill. He caught Frederick's eye across the swirl of tuxedoed guests, a look of genuine pride sparking between them, and in that silent exchange felt the first true ember of belonging ignite beneath the grand dome of crystal and marble. As the final notes of the string quartet faded and a gentle hush settled over the hall, the maitre d' motioned discreetly to the floor manager, and a troop of elaborately costumed servers glided forward bearing polished silver tureens of consommé royal. Each tureen lid was lifted in unison, releasing a wisp of steam scented with fresh tarragon and sweet mirepoix. Inside the clear golden broth floated delicate parcels of minced chicken quenelle, petite cubes of carrot glacé, vibrant green peas, and a sprinkling of finely snipped chervil, each morsel suspended like jewels in liquid amber. Alexander Kendrick received his porcelain bowl as though it were a sacred vessel, its rim brushed with gold, and cradled it in both hands. He inhaled the herb-flecked aroma, then sipped the consommé, allowing the rich, clean flavors to roll across his palate. Savory warmth balanced by vegetal sweetness. Around him, the guests at table 17 leaned forward, their earlier formalities softened into genuine curiosity. A cousin in a midnight blue velvet gown murmured to her companion, "Quite the blend of tradition and innovation, don't you think?" While the silver-haired baron nodded, "Indeed, it's a master class in classical technique." Beyond the table, the table had relaxed into easy camaraderie. Lord Gerard Kendrick, glass of Burgundy in hand, laughed at a quip from the visiting Cyber Council delegate, his laughter resonating through the gilded chamber. Lady Cassandra's elegant profile caught the glow of the chandeliers as she responded with animated gestures, pearls at her wrists chiming softly with her movement. Frederick exchanged a meaningful glance with Alexander, the unspoken bond between them deepening as they shared this moment of culinary artistry. Above, the frescoed ceiling depicted Apollo bestowing light upon the world, and in that moment, Alexander reflected on his own role as a guardian of illumination, shielding society from the shadows of digital threats. The crystal chandelier's prisms danced across marble pilasters, each facet catching a glimmer of candlelight that mirrored the spark of recognition he sensed in his family's eyes. He finished the last spoonful of consommé, placed the bowl gently on its matching saucer, and offered a small nod to the sommelier who was passing by with decanters of vintage Sauterne. Alexander's decision hung in the air. Would he accept the honeyed sweetness of the dessert wine now, or await the final reveal of HeliosTech's security audit to truly savor the fruits of his reconciliation? The choice was his, and in the radiant hush of the Vienna Grand Hotel's ballroom, he felt the confident certainty of a man who had successfully navigated both the covert corridors of cyber warfare and the ornate halls of family legacy. As the last traces of consommé royal were cleared away, a hushed anticipation rippled through the ballroom. Two sommelier apprentices appeared, their crisp tailcoats adorned with HeliosTech lapel pins, each bearing a decanter of wine. One held a centuries-old magnum of Chateau Lafite Rothschild, its dusty label hinting at generations of vintages past, while the other bore a crystalline decanter of golden-hued Sauterne. The assistant nearest Alexander knelt beside table 17 and tilted the Lafite into his crystal glass, the wine's deep garnet hue catching the chandelier's glow. He inhaled its complex bouquet, dark cassis, cedar bark, and a whisper of graphite, then swirled the wine, watching the legs trace slow rivulets down the glass as the room fell into reverent silence. Once every guest had been offered both wines, the orchestra shifted to a soft adagio, and the final course was presented on a mirrored silver platter that reflected chandeliers and painted cherubs alike. There, arranged in meticulous precision, lay an array of miniature patisserie wonders, a dome of vanilla panna cotta, gleaming ivory, and set atop a swirl of passion-fruit coulis. A bite-sized opera cake with razor-thin layers of almond sponge and coffee buttercream, its top glazed in chocolate lacquer, and a pair of delicate macarons, one lavender purple, one pistachio green, each bursting with a jeweled center of raspberry ganache or salted caramel. Alexander selected the panna cotta first, noting how its glossy surface held the light as a pearl would. The first spoonful was silk on his tongue, creamy, subtly sweet, the tropical tang of passion fruit cutting through with bright clarity. He followed with a taste of opera cake, the bittersweet coffee kick juxtaposed against the soft almond crumb, and finished with a delicate macaron whose crisp shell gave way to a luscious burst of black currant gel. Each morsel was a masterclass in balance and technique, a testament to the chef's artistry. Around him, the head table was alight with genuine affability. Lord Gerard Kendrick leaned back in his chair, glass of Lafite in hand, his eyes gleaming with pride. "Absolutely divine," he declared to the gathering, his voice resonant yet warm. Lady Cassandra raised her sauternes in salute, her teardrop sapphire earrings catching the candlelight like twin stars. Frederick, flushed with admiration, offered Alexander an impish grin that conveyed more than any words could. Pride, apology, and brotherly affection rolled into one. In that gilded moment, the years of distance and unspoken misunderstandings dissolved like sugar in the panna cotta's warm depths. Alexander felt a gentle tremor of belonging ripple through him, no longer the solitary general encased in uniform, nor the sidelined son at table 17, but the pivot upon which both family and duty converged. He lifted his glass of Lafite in return, voice steady and rich with gratitude. To family, and the paths that lead us back home. The chorus of clinking crystal echoed under frescoed skies, sealing the bond between a man who kept the world safe in shadows and the loved ones who now celebrated him in light. When the last macarons vanished and glasses were raised once more, the orchestra struck up an exuberant Viennese polka that rippled through the hall like a joyous tide. Crystal chandeliers trembled in delight, scattering prisms of light across marble floors where guests, freshly emboldened by wine and dessert, drifted back onto the dance area. At table 17, the staff swept away empty plates while Alexander Kendrick rose, smoothing the crisp folds of his uniform tunic. Lady Cassandra, her emerald gown aflutter, approached first. She placed a gentle hand on his sleeve and met his steel-gray gaze with warmth that needed no words. "Come," she murmured, guiding him toward the center of the ballroom. Lord Gerard Kendrick followed, his tailored charcoal tailcoat trailing softly behind. Frederick fell into step alongside his brother, the camaraderie between them palpable as they moved beneath frescoed angels and gilded cornices. Outside, the massive floor-to-ceiling windows framed Vienna's nocturnal panorama. The Danube's ribbon of black water reflecting lamplight and the towers of St. Stephen's Cathedral rising against the ink-dark sky. A cool breeze seeped in when the central doors opened, carrying the distant echo of night trams and a faint hint of lilac from the garden courtyard below. Back inside, the polka reached its crescendo as a circle of couples whirled around Alexander and his family. The gilded walls seemed to lean in, the polished columns resonating with the laughter and applause. Stepping forward, Alexander took his mother's hand first, guiding her through a few measured turns, her pearls jingling softly in time with the music. Then his father, whose initial stiffness gave way to a genuine smile as Alexander led him through a partner's pivot. Finally, Frederick joined his brother's other arm, and the two moved in perfect sync, youth and experience reunited in a single dance. As they glided beneath the shimmering chandeliers, the congregation's attention settled on them. The prodigal son who had returned, not in corporate garb or as a distant legend, but as a man fully present in uniform's crisp dignity. Each turn of the dance felt like a stitch mending years of distance, his mother's proud tears glistening, his father's approving nod, Frederick's whispered thanks in his ear. When the final chord rang out, the ballroom erupted in heartfelt applause that echoed like thunder across the marble. Alexander bowed deeply to his family, and then to the assembled guests, insignia gleaming under the flood of light. In that thunderous ovation, amid the swirl of velvet gowns, polished boots, and gilded reliefs, he felt the last barrier fall away. No longer Table 17's silent sentinel, he stood at the heart of his family's world, united at last by love, respect, and the timeless rhythm of shared celebration. 7 days later, Alexander Kendrick arrived at HeliosTech's headquarters in Vienna, no uniform this time, but a sharply tailored navy suit and the ever-present silver compass chain glinting at his collarbone. The glass-walled tower overlooked the Danube's slow sweep beneath dawn's pale light, its steel and glass facade reflecting the city's awakening spires. In the sleek lobby, executives in tailored jackets paused mid-step as he passed, offering respectful nods that bespoke a newfound recognition. A pair of security officers in crisp black suits greeted him by name, their voices carrying the measured deference reserved for someone who held silent authority over billions in defense contracts. He stepped into the boardroom on the 42nd floor, where a long obsidian table spread beneath floor-to-ceiling windows. At its head sat Lord Gerard Kendrick in a charcoal-gray suit, this time without the cool reserve of a banquet hall, his posture relaxed but alert. Beside him, Frederick leaned forward with an open tablet, its screen aglow with charts and line items carefully annotated. A half-dozen HeliosTech executives lined the sides, their expressions a mix of anticipation and deference. Alexander placed a leather-bound dossier before his father, its cover embossed with the Helix project seal, and opened it to the cost oversight section. He spoke with calm precision, his voice steady. Expenditure discrepancies in the Singapore subsidiary have been reconciled. The updated financial plan reduces overhead by 27%, reallocates funds toward encryption development, and strengthens audit trails. He tapped a highlighted line. These enhancements close the security gaps identified by Cyber Command's Phantom Grid team. Frederick nodded, eyes bright. All implemented, Alec, as you recommended. The board approves the revised budget. Lord Gerard set aside his glass of mineral water and met his son's gaze with pride shining in his steel-gray eyes. You've exceeded every expectation, he said, voice warm. HeliosTech is stronger and safer because of your counsel. Alexander paused, allowing the moment to settle like fine crystal. The early morning light flooded the room, gilding the polished surfaces and illuminating the HeliosTech crest carved into the wall behind them. He closed the dossier gently and rose, extending his hand to his father. Thank you, Father. It's an honor to serve, both as your son and as Major General in defense of our shared future. Lord Gerard stood as well, clasping Alexander's hand in both of his. Frederick rose to join them, placing a hand on each of their shoulders in a triumvirate of reconciliation. The executives exchanged relieved smiles, their applause restrained but sincere. Later that day, Alexander returned to Surrey for a private family dinner in the oak-paneled dining room of the Kendrick estate. Torches flickered in wrought iron sconces, casting warm pools of light over ancestral portraits that now included his own NATO commendation photograph, newly hung beside Lord Kendrick's portrait. At the head of the long mahogany table, Lady Cassandra passed him a dish of rosemary roast potatoes, a favorite from his childhood, and smiled. "Welcome home, Alexander," she said, her voice rich with affection. He offered a gentle bow of his head. "Thank you, Mother. It's good to be back." Frederick raised his glass of claret in a final toast. "To Alexander, whose steadfast compass never lost true north." The family echoed the sentiment, glasses chiming beneath vaulted beams echoing centuries of Kendrick history. Seated between his parents and beside his brother, Alexander Kendrick took the first bite of roast potato, its crisp edges giving way to creamy interior, and felt the full circle of his journey settle warmly in his chest. Here at last, duty and family had converged beneath the same roof, and the compass at his heart had guided him truly home.